Like buried treasure, the outposts of the universe have beckoned to the adventurous from immemorial times, princes and potentates, political or industrial, equally with men of science, have felt the lure of the uncharted seas of space. Astrophysics is a branch of astronomy which is the science of treating the physical characteristics of the stars and other heavenly bodies, their chemical composition, light, heat, atmosphere, etc. Spectroscopy was first initiated by Sir Isaac Newton in 1672. He discovered that if you use a prism to form the rainbow spectrum, that you are actually seeing the spectrum of white light. The colors he saw are now considered as rainbow colors, or fundamental colors. The rainbow colors are red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. A variety of different spectroheliographs have been made by many different scientists, but the one that stands out the most was invented by George Ellery Hale in 1891. Hale's goal was to be able to produce a monochromatic image of a portion of the sun. To do this, Hale took a regular spectroscope, but added a second slit to isolate certain hydrogen lines. In 1892, the Kenwood Observatory obtained the spectroheliograph from George Ellery Hale, who was the director of the observatory at that time. A photograph was taken with the two prominent calcium lines, H and K, that revealed immense luminous clouds of calcium vapor that was not seen with a typical spectroscope. The photo of the cloud of calcium vapor proved that the study of the solar atmosphere above and around sunspots was possible. Solar storms on the sun do not act as regular storms here on Earth. The biggest difference is that the sun shows no difference in the storms between the equator and poles. This phenomena brought many theories about how sunspots may be vast whirling storms. Sir John Herschel, a British astronomer who discovered Uranus, was one of the first to have a vortex theory that sunspots are whirling storms, similar to tornadoes here on Earth. With the spectroheliograph, Professor Hale, along with collaborators, showed proof that sunspots are magnetic, which would lead to temperature drops. The Hale-Nicholson law is a systematic property of sunspots' magnetic fields and was proven by Hale's polarity laws. Discovered that large sunspots always have the same polarity depending on the pole it is in. Sunspots in the North Pole have a different polarity than in the South, disproving Sir John Herschel's vortex theory. In 1886, a curious banker in Los Angeles, E. F. Spence, wanted to build an observatory on Mount Wilson. Mr. Spence promised a large gift of money and partnered with the universities of Southern California and Harvard. The observatory on Mount Wilson would have been the site of the largest telescope in the world. The telescope was planned to have 40-inch lenses weighing over 600 pounds and cost over $800, which would be equivalent to $25,000 today, for one lens of the two required for a telescope. Spence's observatory was on the path of success, but an unfortunate economic crash in 1889 put it to a stuttering halt. Although the observatory failed, it did make astronomers curious of what could be done with the large telescope. This initiated the next great era of astronomy. In 1892, George Ellery Hale, partnered with the University of Chicago, convinced the university to purchase the largest lens in the world at that time from the Elvin Clark firm. Hale then proceeded to get an interview with Charles T. Yerke, the financier of Chicago's electric railway system, to fund the observatory by playing against his vanity, by seeing that the recognition he would receive would be tremendous if he were to build the largest telescope in the world. With the idea of being highly recognized, Mr. Yerke exclaimed to reporters, "I don't care what the cost, send me the bill." It was estimated that he would pay $1 million for its worldly recognition. Within a week, Mr. Yerke and the university hired two outstanding contractors. The first of the two contractors was Clark & Sons. Their job was to prepare the discs, and the second contractor was Warner & Swassey. Their job was to build the mounts for the 40-inch telescope. George Elliott Hale had wanted to build the observatory on Mount Wilson, which was also on the minds of many astronomers, but the observatory was built in Williams Bay, Wisconsin, as per Mr. Yerke's request. As people asked why it was built there instead of on Mount Wilson, Hale wanted to respect the wishes of Mr. Yerke to stay local. The reply was, "It was too far away." Andrew Carnegie established an organization dedicated to scientific discovery. His goals were as stated: to encourage, in the broadest and most liberal manner, investigation, research, and discovery and the application of knowledge to the improvement of mankind. Mr. Carnegie wanted to inspire, encourage, and help those who wanted to explore scientific questions. The Carnegie Institution was founded in 1902, a non-profit organization that devotes its resources to exceptional individuals to explore into scientific questions.
Hale's father, William Hale, was a wealthy man who inspired Hale to become what he is. At a very young age, William funded George to build his own shop and observatory in the backyard. Here, George spent a lot of time constructing telescopes and other various instruments. This observatory would later become known as Kenwood Observatory, owned by the University of Chicago, and George Ellery Hale would be appointed as the director of his own observatory. In 1896, George Hale would receive a 60-inch mirror disc for a large reflecting telescope from his father, and would mount it 6 years later in 1902. The telescope would be placed in the Yerkes Observatory. In January 1902, George Ellery Hale read an article in the Chicago Tribune about the Carnegie Institution of Washington. The article sent him on a course of one of his biggest accomplishments yet, of creating his very own observatory.
According to the Carnegie Institution of Washington Yearbook No. 1, they acknowledged the deficiency of observatories in the southern hemisphere at that time and that something ought to be done to remedy this disparity. Under Appendix A on astronomy, it said, "It is quite possible for the Carnegie Institution to make a modest beginning through the appropriation of comparatively small sums from existing funds."
Hale was ecstatic when he saw the opportunity to find a funder for his projects. As eager as he was, he did not immediately present his largest project, for it would have required the Institute's total annual income. In Hale's words, if the presentation of a large plan is liable to jeopardize such an appropriation, it would be better not to bring it forward. Instead of going after his ultimate dreams, he decided to uphold his policy, that the Yerkes Observatory must be made a complete success before another large undertaking can be considered justifiable.
Also mentioned in the Yearbook No. 3, the Carnegie Institution was still interested in getting an observatory in the southern hemisphere for two main reasons. A, may lead to important discoveries, and that will certainly fill gaps in knowledge of particular things. B, it does not break the Institute's policy of entering fields of existing organizations. With the work of George Ellery Hale, the institution has been interested in his capabilities, which helped Hale in his goals of creating an observatory on Mount Wilson.
In 1904, Hale would negotiate with the directors of the Mount Wilson Toll Road Company for a portion of the summit. The negotiated deal would give Hale 40 acres at the summit. The deal is for 99 years of rent and a water supply completely free. The importance of water being supplied was because in the early 1900s, Los Angeles was increasing in population and the water supply was being depleted. With the insurance of water supply, Hale was more than willing to make a deal. Before the year 1905, Hale received extraordinary news that his request grant was accepted and the Carnegie Institution would give George Ellery Hale $150,000 every year for 2 years. Within 1 year, the Mount Wilson Solar Observatory was built. The observatory would be complete with living quarters and its own electric plant using a dynamo based on a design of Michael Faraday.
The focus of the observatory was on the 60-foot Snow telescope and on the laboratory. The Snow telescope was named after Helen Snow, who funded the 40-inch lens, which was part of the Snow telescope, to be mounted. The telescope was moved from the Yerkes Observatory and up thousands of feet on a winding, narrow road to be placed in a 60-foot building. This was a tremendous feat. The laboratory was equipped with rooms that had the ability to perform a wide variety of experiments, including chemical and photographic development. The Mount Wilson Solar Observatory has an extensive fire protection system by teaming up with the U.S. Bureau of Forestry. The system includes fire breaks, a fire pump, fire hoses, fire-resistant paint, and fire extinguishers at the ready of an emergency. In 1914, Edwin Hubble began his Ph.D. in astronomy at the Chicago University. The timing was great, as a rejuvenated fire for exploration into space had recently begun. 3 years later, George Ellery Hale invited Hubble to work at the Mount Wilson Observatory. Hubble regretfully declined, as he said, "I am off to war." Hubble joined the fight in World War I to fight against the Germans. Several years later, Edwin Hubble was discharged and immediately went to the Mount Wilson Observatory. Feeding into society's desire for discovery and exploration, Edwin Hubble began the new era of exploration into the expanding universe. Hubble based his research off the foundation laid by George Ellery Hale and other astrophysicists.
The exchange of ideas and scientific research in the late 1800s and early 1900s, with the help of the Carnegie Institution, the gigantic amount of publications at that time led to the teaching of Edwin Hubble. and the creation of the Hubble telescope, leading to figure out the final frontier.